Welcome everybody to My Best Sales Mistake. This is the show where we dive into not only the successes, but also some of the maybe opportunities or moments that taught us things, whether we liked it or not, that allowed us to learn a few things along the way. Today's guest, I'm super excited for. We have Carl Ferreira. He is I think, well, let me just say this. What I'm really excited about with speaking with Carl is the fact that I just absolutely love the authenticity of how he shows up when he's on LinkedIn and talking about things. I think the two things that it gets summed up in best are how you sell is why you win, which I wholeheartedly subscribe to, and I think that's just a fantastic way to sum things up. And of course, hashtag sales fam.
Of course.
Carl's had quite the career. He's been through a number of different individual contributor roles. He's been through HubSpot. He's currently a director of sales at Refined Labs. Um, let's start it where, like, hashtag sales fam, Carl. Like, I think that just like is such a great, I don't know what it is. It's just like it sums things up, but I think you're the only person I've ever seen use it. So like, where did it come from? And how did you just, come
It
up
was,
with such a great tagline?
the sales fam tagline was accidental, honestly, so was the how you sell is why you win, which I've had for like 3 years. That one I'm like, I want to trademark it legally, but sales fam was accidental. I don't know, I forget like where it actually came from, but yeah, somehow it became like my hashtag. And it's funny because it like people will like DM me and be like, "Hey, is it okay if like I use like the sales fam hat?" They like ask my permission, and I'm like, "Yeah, I don't own it. I mean, go for it." And then some people will like like tattle on other people, right? They'll be like, "Hey,
Uh,
this guy he used the sales fam hashtag," and I'm like, "It's fine, man." And so it's like somehow it's just been attached to my brand. How you sell is why you win is a little bit different of a story. I actually kind of learned. I, I I sort of it's a variant, right, of something that Brian Halligan, who is CEO, co-founder of HubSpot, he used to always say, like on internal, like all hands calls, he used to say a version of like, because again, like HubSpot, their whole thing is right where they don't grow through acquisition, they build the software themselves. That's why it's so awesome, and that's why it's user friendly, unlike their main competitor Salesforce, right? So big differentiator is how they build, right? They build it in house, they don't build through acquisition. So he used to say, I remember one time he said something like, how we build is why our customers love us. And I just loved like that framing. And then like I repurposed it and I was like, huh, like how you build is why you win. Man, how you sell is why you win. And it just like came out of my mouth one day and I was like, oh my God, there's like an unlock. So totally accidental fumbling around words and some iteration. And then finally it stuck. And I just, man, it's been my tagline. I've wanted to remove it a bunch of times and I'm like, I can't. It's just cemented there on my profile. Like
Well, I
it's,
mean, it speaks to basically probably how you approach your entire job
yeah,
and how you approach your entire career. So, I mean, I love those moments of accidental genius where you just sort of are playing around with something, it all sort of comes together. Oftentimes when you're away from your computer, right? Like maybe you're off for a walk or you're doing something else.
yeah.
Also want to say shout out to our good friend Jen Allen. Hey Jen, welcome to your first My Best Sales Mistake.
Hey, Jen. Good to see you. Yeah, Jen follows a lot of my spicy takes. She has a lot of spicy takes of her own. So Jen's a major supporter of my work, of my life's work. So
I
definitely,
think
Jen.
a lot of us feel the same way. So special shout out to Jen. So talk to me a little bit about how you got into sales.
Yeah,
How did you kind of get started down this path?
yeah. So me getting into sales started with a bank account that was empty and a family that was growing. So I was like mid 20s or something like that, right? Married. Me and my wife started having kiddos. I have two daughters. And man, I just had like this moment, if you want to call it that, where I was kind of like fumbling around. You know, a little bit of my story, Jeff. Like I was transitioning out of the military, and that's a very challenging time. because you don't know like what you're going to do. Right. And your skills don't really translate. And so there's kind of like this vacuum in your heart that you're trying to like fill with something. Right. Like I think like transitioning athletes experience this void moment of transition. Right. Military and veterans, anybody who's transitioning, founders who have a big exit, right, then enter into like this transition period where they're like, what do I do now? And so I was kind of fumbling around with some different roles, crappy stuff that didn't pay me anything, and really struggled to like tether my experience in the military to like stuff that corporations wanted. It's like a lot of the skills they just don't translate, right? Like there's a lot of soft skills that might translate, but like a lot of companies, they need hard skills. Like you have to know how to use certain tech and do certain things and have certain knowledge, and I just didn't have any of that. So I made a decision that I was like, this is my life. I'm not going to be broke. Like I have a family. I'm tired of this. So I got very pissed off. For step one. Anybody who wants to lose their situation, they just get pissed off at your situation. And so I was kind of like talking to some different friends about it. And I talked to a high school friend of mine, and he was a sales director. And, he invited me to kind of come work for him. And he was like, dude, this is going to be hard. It's going to suck. Like you're going to cold call down a spreadsheet. It's outside sales. Like it's grindy, but I did it. And so I went and did that for him. It was like full commission. I mean, it was like grindy sales role, man. But guess what? I was like, this is cool. I learned. Like I was learning, I was closing deals, I was successful. I was like, this isn't so bad, right? I felt in control of my income, right? When I hadn't before, right? Previously, I had to like wait for a boss to give me a raise in January. And now it was like, oh, shoot, like I can just give myself a raise and just go close more deals, right? So I just like this big unlock. And again, it was super grindy. It was very, very hard. I was traveled every Sunday to Thursday every week.
Wow.
I had 2 little girls at home. So like a lot of stress on my marriage and stuff like that. But it laid a foundation for me. I wasn't there for super long. I crushed it for like 7, 8 months. And then I moved on. And my wife actually was like applying for sales jobs for me at night.
Oh, nice.
Which is funny. Shout out to my wife, Jamie. But I got a call one day from like the SaaS company, Ministry Brands.
Yeah.
And they were like, hey, we're like, look, I saw you applied, which wasn't me, but I was like, yeah, I applied. Cool. Yeah, I'm in the role. And it was so funny. I'll never forget. It was Jesse Craycraft, still very close with him. And he called me up and he was like, we're looking for a seller. This is what we sell. It's technology to churches and nonprofits. They have a bunch of tech and software that they use to kind of run their ops. And we're looking for somebody. And they loved me because like I had like some very grindy sales experience. And that's what they needed. They needed like a trained seller and not necessarily like, they historically had hired like pastors who wanted to make more money. And so there was some like subject matter expertise, but there wasn't like sales acumen. So I brought that to the table. And it was so funny. I remember I was like, cool. Like how much travel is there? And I remember Jesse was like, there's no travel. What do you mean? I was like, what do I mean? What do you mean? There's no travel. Like, that's all the world of sales that I knew. He was like, yeah, you just like Zoom and we'll send you a computer. And I was like, I'm not in Knoxville, so like I can't come into the office. And he was like, there's no office, man. And I was like, I'm going to make this money potentially sitting at home, talking through the computer to people. And he was like, yeah. I was like, oh my God, mind blown, right? So that's where my SaaS career started. I crushed it at Ministry Brands. It was so awesome. It was a really great experience. Obviously learned how to inside sell and demo and all these new skills. And then that's when I moved on to, HubSpot and my, career kind of accelerated from there. So anyways, that was a really long-winded way to say that was like how I kind of got into sales. And, I, for the most part, resolved my initial concern. It was like, hey, I don't want to be broke. I want to provide a comfortable life for my family. I don't need a Ferrari, but I would like to, for my daughters to have things that I didn't. And so, I accomplished that. And so Yeah, we'll
That's
see.
awesome.
But
That's such a great story. And shout out to Gideon. Gideon said that he also served and that he was kind of commenting on that transition
yeah,
from, working in the military
yeah,
to trying to work in the private sector. And this is a challenge I've heard from a lot of folks. Like, I think I've also seen it in a little bit different context, but like, say, like a consultant, somebody who does this kind of consulting gig.
yeah,
Well, they haven't done a career in either finance or one of the functions or HR or whatever. And so to your point, even though you have translatable skills, that doesn't resonate with like recruiters. And so that can be really challenging. So I
yeah.
love that you just took the initiative. And I mean, wow. I mean, what guts you had to just take on a full commission role and say, I'm gonna pound the pavement and I'm gonna get this done.
Yeah, and I mean, thanks to my wife for supporting me, and it was very challenging
Wow.
time, but it completely changed the trajectory of my life and my career. I cringe sometimes to think like, what if I wouldn't have taken that chance and I would have kind of stayed in my 9 to 5 corporate job making 50K a year? Where would I be today? Yeah, it's just weird. Maybe I would have stumbled upon because sales I didn't even think. I think a lot of people don't even think to look at sales, right, as a career. It's not something you Google, right? Like, and so, yeah. If anybody's listening to this, man, I always encourage young folks that are, you know, just trying to figure out their financial situation and young families, and like, it doesn't sound very glamorous, but it is a path out of an uncomfortable situation into a more comfortable situation. If you're okay to trade, the comfort of a 9 to 5 with the discomfort of rejection and having to do things like cold call, et cetera. So it's a trade-off of discomfort, right? And so that's how I thought of that transition, right? I was like, okay, sales is hard and cold calling seems like a giant pain in the ass, but what's harder is like I have to like secretly check my bank account like every time I'm going to get groceries and just make sure. Like that is way more difficult and painful than the pain of rejection of strangers in a sales conversation. So that was kind of my mindset. It's not that one is easy and one is hard. They're both very challenging in different ways. I will choose this hard over, the being broke hard, if that makes sense. So that's how I framed it in my mind, and it worked out. Sales is still very challenging. Obviously, I don't know if we're going to talk about it today, but the current climate, it's still really hard. But it's the easiest hard thing I think that you could do, and that's just how I choose to kind of, to view it. So
Yeah, 100%. And to your point, like I even did a business degree and never was sales or business development presented as one of the career paths.
yeah,
It was like there were all these other business career paths, but nobody sat down and talked about it. The closest they got was marketing. So fast forward 12, 15 years into my career, same as you, I just kind of stumbled into sales and I'm like, this is an incredible profession. The amount of freedom it allows, the amount of determining your own destiny,
yeah,
being able to directly impact the compensation and earn, much better than, a typical 9 to 5 job. I mean, it truly is one of the benefits of sales, but you have some trade-offs. So, I mean, let's dive in a little bit to kind of what you're observing out there today. Like, what are you kind of seeing and feeling in terms of, some of the challenges? I think I saw a statistic from, I think it's pronounced EBSTA, that I think 73% of reps missed quota in Q2. I think Q2 was definitely a shock after a lot of people did pretty well in Q1. So what are kind of some of the things that you're observing that are shifting out in the marketplace?
I think that there's a lot of shifts. Okay. So I could answer your question with like 10 different answers, but I'm going to share what I believe is the most fundamental issue or challenge or roadblock or headwind that sales organizations are facing. And it's that the buyers don't have compelling reasons to change, or at least as compelling a reason as they had during COVID. So if you go to COVID, it was like if you sold Gong, for instance, or some kind of technology that was like outreach, right? Or call recording software, whatever, right? Like some of those, HubSpot, right? Like some of those softwares that were like just really in demand. You didn't have to make a why change case to companies. The climate was screaming at every buyer and company, you have to change, you have no choice. So sellers had a little bit easier of a time, me included, because we didn't have to make a why change case. We could just make a case to why us, right? So sales conversations were largely, well, why HubSpot over Salesforce or over Pipedrive or right, some other CRM, right? For Gong, it's like, why change? Like, you can't hear what your reps are saying. I don't even have to convince you why change. No one's in the office. So it's really like, why Gong versus Chorus, right? And now there's a whole bunch of other players in that space. But I think what's changed is that was the environment. Like, reps didn't have to have strong why change skills, if that makes sense. Today, that's totally different. And so reps are still trying to skip over why change, and even marketing teams, right, are their messaging on, LinkedIn or through their advertising is still not why change oriented. It's still not change management oriented. It's still why us. Why should you choose us as your vendor? Buyers aren't there. They're like, why should I choose you? I'm not even thinking about you. Why should I change to begin with, right? Because there's not like some compelling economic force like a global pandemic that is driving catastrophic global trends and change, right? And changing the face of a company. So I think like that is underneath it all what sales teams have failed to be able to, or been sluggish to adapt to. And they're like throwing their hands in the air and they're like, why is I went to P Club in 2021 and 2020, like, and I'm doing the same stuff. Why is it not working anymore? And it's because, there's no compelling reason to change. It's the reason that you have to sell now, or you have to like share and convince or sell a team that change is required. And then you talk about why us. And so I don't know if anyone, I don't know if you agree with that or, if folks listening to this would agree, but that's what I think underneath it all, right? Sluggish win rates, higher discount rates, longer sales cycles. Underneath that, I think my hypothesis, this is my experience, it would be the root cause of like, there's not a compelling reason to change. And reps are, I think sluggish to develop that skill that has atrophied for the last 3 years. You just haven't had to do that, So that's I don't know. What do you think about that?
I wholeheartedly agree, and I think what's interesting is, to your point, that we had a number of different catalysts that were reasons for change that made it so. What was really interesting and I think different about the pandemic was there were some clear winners. You called out like a Gong, a Zoom, etc., and there were some clear losers. But then after that period, what was really interesting is basically both the private and the public sector were flush with cash.
Yeah.
And everybody hoarded cash in 2020. And so then the floodgates were opened up in 2021. And to your point, it was more, hey, how do we just choose how to spend this money? Not do we spend money in the first place?
Yeah.
And I think what's super interesting is at the moment, folks are sort of, I feel like we're at a tipping point where there was a really, really strong hoarding of cash early off in the first half of the year.
Yep.
And now folks are saying, okay, we're not on target, but we need to think about how we start to change that. But to your point, sellers need to be able to speak to what are the reasons or what are the consequences of not doing something.
Right.
And so what's interesting is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but Matt Dixon, the author of the Challenger Sale, came out with a book in September of last year called The Jolt Effect.
Yep.
And what's really interesting, and it's kind of one of those things where it's like, once you see it, you can't unsee it, is he makes the argument based off of analyzing 2.5 million sales calls that essentially buying requires two playbooks these days. So the first playbook is you have to defeat status quo. You have to essentially get them, to your point, to say, I need to make a change.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, it's the devil, it's the fact that, like, you may have a process or a piece of software that's stuck together with duct tape and glue and gum, but it's what and it works. So first is we have to talk about the cost of inaction of needing to change in the first place. But the second thing that his research showed that was really interesting is just because folks realize that there's an issue with their process today or their solution today doesn't mean they're comfortable making the decision as to how to fix it. And the way this is summarized, you may have seen this on LinkedIn, is it's like people no longer have FOMO, fear of missing out. They have FOMO, fear of messing up. And essentially, you don't want to get caught holding the hot potato of making the wrong decision. either because you ticked off your team or you didn't get the ROI. So what's interesting is in the sense is you kind of have like a lot of sales teams, to your point, are struggling with that first moment of getting people to even realize they need to make a change. So that's where we see a lot of opportunities kicking out in sort of like that S1, S2 space. But even if we get to that S2 space and we think we've defeated status quo, a lot of folks are struggling in that S3, S4 stage and getting people to realize it's okay, this is the right decision, and getting consensus. So I think that's kind of one of the things that I've been observing out in the marketplace.
Yeah, let me add one thing to that. I think there's a new competitor on the block. I posted about this on LinkedIn a few weeks back, but there's a new competitor that reps aren't prepared for. And the competitor is other adjacent options to solving the core problem. Let me give you an example. Let's go back to Gong, right? I might be, 1,000-person B2B SaaS company who wants to increase win rates. Okay, let's just throw like a softball out there. I could implement something like Gong, or I could hire Challenger, or I could invest in a sales enablement hire internally, right? When money is tighter, I can't just buy all the things, right? Like that's what happened back in 2021, 2020 was I could just get all those options. So today it's not just Gong versus Chorus versus Avoma. It's also like, do I solve this problem in this specific way? Because there's actually 10 different ways to solve for a win rate problem or, a top of funnel, like outbound messaging problem. Maybe it's buying outreach. Maybe it's hiring somebody like Josh Braun to help you with your messaging. Like there's so many options of different variations of how to solve a problem that that slows deals down, right? And sometimes you may lose a deal not to a competitor, but to like an adjacent solution because there's limited capital, right? I have to choose as a buyer not only Gong versus Chorus, but I have to I'm going to make a sacrifice. And that's also me not choosing to hire that sales consultant or Challenger for however much money. That also seems like a really good option, right? And Jeff makes a compelling case. And that's what you're up against, right? When you're trying to sell professional services, I'm up against it as well. When we're trying to sell professional services, that's one way to solve a pipeline issue, right? There are other options. If we already have like kind of an ABM play that's working, like maybe it's hiring a person that is dedicated to that content, or maybe it's buying 6 cents. So it's like, I'm not just up against other agencies, marketing agencies. I'm also up against other ways to solve the problem. And I don't think that reps are prepared for kind of that silent competitor in the room. It's not just like the obvious competitor alone on the G2 grid. It's not just those companies that you're up against. It's actually companies that you never heard of and other stuff, right? Other ways. So I don't want to ramble, but that's another thing that I've observed, that I lose deals to stuff sometimes that's not even like another agency or the
I like calling these the what if we just what if we just things,
yeah.
because there are ways to take risk off the table by making small incremental changes.
Yep.
A change, to your point, like Challenger, is almost signing up for a bit of a belief system.
Yep.
It is driving organizational change. It also creates the impact that you want. But there are millions of what if we just did this for a little bit and tested it out.
This. Yep. Yeah. And like those competitors often are in the hearts and the minds of your buyers. And so as a seller, it's like, how do I get them to articulate that in a sales process so I can face those other competitors, right? And I don't want to call them objections, but when you're helping a buyer make a decision, you have to understand that there are lots of different decisions that this buyer is making. It's not just this decision, and it's not just you versus that other agency. It's also like there's a whole spectrum of things that they could do instead. Are those things on the table so that we can discuss them? And that takes a special kind of sales skill to get to a point where you have that kind of rapport with your buyer, where you're genuinely helping them to make a business decision, not helping them just to buy Refine Labs or Challenger. It's how do you look at all of these decisions? And buyers, again, they are like some buyers are very savvy and sophisticated, and they have frameworks for making these decisions. But a lot of times, I'm sure you run into stuff like they don't, right? They don't buy things very often. And so, like, if you can be the salesperson that's guiding that conversation, you know, you're going to win, or it's very difficult to lose, at least, in that scenario. So anyways, you had asked what I'm seeing. I agree with you. I think there's the two things, right? The why change, like reps are uncomfortable or don't have the skill set to really work through that, because that's really like the first part of the sales process is why should you change to begin with, and then it's why us. And I think the second thing is a silent competitor in the room, which is adjacent products or services or ways of thinking about the problem. So I could not get Challenger at all and be like, you know what? The sales team I'm not even going to invest in the sales team. Actually, I'm just going to go take these resources and go send them to marketing, right? Or
Yeah.
conversely, it could be like, hey, we have a top of funnel problem and I'm going to talk to Refine Labs. Challenger is not a competitor. Today, you might be, because it's like, oh, actually, I don't want to spend $100K with Refine Labs. I'm actually going to invest $100K in the sales team. And now Challenger and Tech is now on that. So it's like the competitive landscape is just different than I think it was previously, when it's just you versus another vendor. And again, my point is, there's no training really for this. Like, reps are just blindsided by this and they're left wondering, wow, why did I get ghosted? Or wow, why is my sales cycle 40% longer? And I think this is one of the realities. So anyways.
What are some of the things that you've been shifting in your own approach to uncover some of these silent competitors, or trying to think about, what some of these, what if we just potential risks to deals are, either in your prep or in some of your early sales conversations?
I think for me, great question. I think for me, it's like calling them out, right? I'm challenging them. Hey, what Refine Labs, like, we're pricey. Why not do this? Why not do that? So it's almost like proactively bringing up all those other options to pressure test, like, how they're thinking about this, right? Not only does that surface some of these other kind of silent competitors in a process and in what they're thinking, it also sets me up as the consultant in this conversation, right? They're not having a sales conversation with me anymore, right? We have now kind of elevated this conversation to something entirely different. This is now a business conversation. Oh, Carl, I hadn't considered that, or I hadn't considered this, or yeah, we tried that. You might hear that, right? Be like, hey, why haven't you beefed up your sales, your win rate, and invested in something like Challenger? Oh, well, we tried that, actually. We did this, we did that, right? So it can uncover some of that. So then I can kind of direct the conversation. So I don't want to call that like you're laying landmines, but it's similar to that, right? I'm at least putting up some hurdles to kind of see what the buyer does and how they react, et cetera. So I think that's one way. Just call them out. Don't let that stuff float under the table. Try to get as much of it, kind of above the surface as possible. And you'll do two things. You'll have a business conversation and a sales conversation, and you will find those things that you're really up against. So now you can prepare the rest of the sales process to navigate them.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, you're uncovering what those silent objections are, so you can provide some advice. What everybody wants to be is the trusted advisor, correct? And how can we be a trusted advisor if we don't know what to advise on? Because otherwise, if we just are focused on our solution, the only thing we're going to be able to do is, quote unquote, push our solution, which feels like a very icky, almost offense defense sort of relationship.
Yeah.
Versus, to your point, if we're able to help them think about this in a holistic manner, whether we're the solution or not the solution, we can at least provide our perspective. Our perspective is likely going to be, influenced by where we come from and what problems we solve for. But we're going to be speaking at the problem level, not the, hey, my stuff level.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I always am like sort of implicitly thinking through risk in my own opportunities. And I think one of the risks that, like, saying this risk keeps me up at night is like a little dramatic. I sleep fine. But one of the risks that that weighs on me is the risk that there is a better salesperson selling against me, right? And so I always remember that it's not me versus another agency, or when I was at HubSpot, it's not me versus like Salesforce. It is, but what's deeper than that is like, it's me against potentially a better rep in my territory, right? And so if I'm not the best rep, regardless of the solution, which I can't control. You either have a solution that's great and has great reviews, or you're selling something that it is a laggard, right? But what I can control is if I'm the best rep in this sphere, right, of all the people that the buyer is talking to, if I'm the best, I can position myself better, and it minimizes the risk of me being disrupted by a better rep, right? So I don't know if you think like that, or if other sellers think like that. Maybe it's unique to me, or I don't know where I got this from, but I'm always like nervous. Like, is there a rep following up better? Is there a rep having a higher level business conversation than I am? Because a lot of times it boils down to little things like that, and not necessarily like Challenger and Refine Labs, two amazing companies that can transform your outcomes. So what's going to be the differentiator? It's really me versus you, Jeff, right? And so I think about that a lot. And that's why I've always like pushed and feel anxiety to make sure that I'm pushing into like a business level conversation, because if nothing else is different between me and my competitor, me having a business conversation and them having a product conversation, I will win, right? It's hard to lose in that scenario. And so I want to like stack those cards in my favor. And again, it's another, thing that I make sure I'm mindful of. And it's another reason why I sell in this way, because I'm anxious. I have to be the best seller, because I know a lot of times like there's other really great sellers that I'm up against that I'll never know who they are, right? So
I think that resonates with me a lot. And I'll tell you a story from last year. A little bit earlier in the year, about April, I had started off the year horribly. I think I was at 2% of goal in Q1. So not exactly on track to hit my number.
Yeah.
And in April, I actually lost a competitive deal to, one of our competitors. And it was a long sales cycle, 2-3 month sales cycle.
Gosh.
And I asked for feedback, and they kindly gave me a feedback session. And it was the most valuable thing that happened in all of last year.
Yeah.
So I said, you know what, Jeff, like what happened was we told you that change management was a concern for us, and you addressed it, but they brought in somebody did a workshop on it. And that separated them early. They're like, you almost clawed it back because later on you did this, and this, but it was just enough that it separated you guys early on.
Yeah.
And that was like an anvil, like almost like a Wile E. Coyote anvil hitting me in the head kind of moment.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, later on that same year, I had an opportunity where we were a much more expensive solution.
Yep.
And I knew it. And I just went into that conversation so free flowing, but I zeroed in directly on win rates, how they were trending, how that was impacting pipeline, and tied it exactly back to, the problem they're looking to solve. And I found out later we won that deal because the CEO said in that moment, I was like, that's how I want my people to sell. And it illuminated where we were at. And I traced that directly back to that moment that I lost a deal earlier on. I'm not sure if you've ever had kind of one of those moments where you're mid deal and unfortunately it doesn't work out in your favor, but it provides that opportunity for learning.
Yeah. I have a deal that's the opposite of that back in HubSpot that, again, I don't want to be dramatic and say I'll never forget it, but it's been years and I still remember it, and I'll probably remember it for a while more, especially now that I'm telling the story publicly. But there's a pretty chunky deal that I had in my pipeline, and I remember like the VP marketing. It's just to buy HubSpot. This is HubSpot days. I remember the VP marketing was like pretty overwhelmed, and I could kind of like gauge that. Like she had a lot of decisions going on. Like the company was going through in the IPO process. So like there was a lot of micromanagement on spend and things like that. There was just a lot going on in the organization. And I won the deal. And I remember that like I struggled through demos and stuff like that with this company. It was, I just never felt like it like nailed it, And I remember I won the deal, and I don't want to say I was surprised, but I was like, that was not my best sales process. So I thought. And I got feedback. I always like to ask people like, hey, what was like, obviously, we have the best solution or whatever of everyone. That's why you chose us. But like, give me some feedback. Like, what really was it that tipped the scales that made you choose us? I love to ask that question when I can, when I win a deal, because you usually get an answer that's kind of surprises you. And she said, and this was, I won against Salesforce, right? Which I can say that because most of the deals you either lose or win to Salesforce, right? It was like every deal was a competitive deal. And I remember she said, Carl, I I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I super deeply understand like what HubSpot does or what it can do. Like I think we tried, and she was kind of referring to the demos and stuff. She's like, it was overwhelmed, not just by you and HubSpot and its robustness, but like all these other vendors too. She's like, but working with you was so much easier, and working with them in the sales process, she means, was so much more challenging and friction. Like you followed up, you didn't force me to get on calls. You would send me looms instead of making me book a meeting. You were able to answer a lot of questions. You worked in like other stakeholders, like your SE, a lot more frictionlessly. And that just like gave me a good feeling that it's probably going to be like that to work with you all after the sale. And like working with Salesforce was just like, they always forced me to get on a call and spend 30 minutes, and they didn't know answers. I have to bring in this person or that person. She was like, I just got scared and nervous that it was going to be like that. And that's like what was a moment where, and again, this was a chunky deal for HubSpot. I mean, we're talking like a 30 to 50K ACV, which was, is pretty chunky for in the HubSpot world. And that just taught me a really important lesson, because I thought the deal process sucked. Like I thought I sucked, but I did like those little silly things right. Things that I thought were like, yeah, I'm just going to send her a loom to answer this question. Why would I drag her onto a call? And that's what won me the deal. So it was an important kind of milestone of learning in my, in my career, that it was like, hey, how you sell is why you win, or something like that, And so that was, again, a positive sort of learning experience. I've had a few of those at Refine Labs as well. And a recent example is just like at Refine Labs, we do a lot of team selling. And I think a lot of agencies don't team sell, right? You just talk to your salesperson, and then you never meet anyone else. And then you kind of get thrown over the fence, and then you meet your service delivery people after you buy. At Refine Labs, it's not like that. Bring Chris onto calls, right? Why wouldn't I? Like everybody loves Chris. Like it'd be stupid not to bring him on the calls, right? So I'm like, hey, you want to meet the team? Yeah, I'll bring him onto the next call. I'll bring an SME. I even make jokes about myself. Be like, hey, look, I've never run marketing. I'm a sales guy. So I want to bring on the next call like somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. And I'll have like some self-deprecating kind of humor. And dude, buyers love that stuff. And it helps, again, to build trust and credibility. It also relieves pressure from me, because I don't have to perform and pretend to know things that I don't. Talk to Chris, talk to Judy, talk to somebody that you're actually going to work with, ask them questions, vet them out. And then those sales just naturally then just close and happen. Again, going back to that concept of it's just hard to lose, right? Mm-hmm. If you're another agency, it's very hard for you to beat me or us in that scenario, So anyways, I'm rambling.
I love that. No, I think that's fantastic. And it is important. I think there are salespeople who have the misconception that it's on them, that it's all them. They need to show up and do everything and own everything. Yeah. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Sometimes the line I like to share with people is like, wouldn't you like to meet either, your CS partner or potentially a facilitator? Because it's like, arranged marriages are great and all, but wouldn't you rather go on a date first?
Yeah.
At least have the opportunity of see who you're going to work with and get a feel for it. Because then it starts to, and I think that's that second, kind of decision point. It reduces that uncertainty that where customers start to get cold feet, because you're already sort of working with them. Yeah. You're already showing them what it's like to work with you.
Family. Yeah. It feels like I'm being onboarded now and not being sold anymore, which is a good feeling. And it changes, like, again, the experience of another agency you might be evaluating who still has me in their sales process. Well, with Carl or Refine Labs, it feels like I'm getting started already. Like that's exciting to me, So, you don't always pull cards like that, but I think the more often that you can, do things like that and, and have that culture where everyone is selling at your organization, then it makes a difference, and it tips the scales when you have a lot of just great competitors that all kind of appear to be the same, right? At the end of the day, every marketing agency is going to say similar stuff. Yeah, we're going to do good marketing for you that drives more pipeline and revenue. It's like, there's nothing else to say, but what tips the scales, we might have some fancy frameworks and a good case study, but at the end of the day, it's like, Challenger is going to, at the core of it, be saying similar things as other, sales training organizations. It's like, we're going to help your team to do better selling, which is going to result in more revenue, right? And so what really tips the scales and is differentiating? I think it's that experience. And I know it sounds like a corny platitude, but it works. And it's one of the most important things that I think I've learned throughout my sales career is that like the how of how you sell is why you win. Okay. Jen Allen's going to give me such a hard time. So
The data backs it up, man. The data backs it up. The sales experience is truly the biggest differentiator. So you're preaching to the choir here. All right, kind of two more questions that I do want to just add on. There's been such a trendy thing to say like we need to be multi-threaded.
Yeah.
And I think what a lot of reps take that on is like, I need to be multi-threaded into my client accounts. But what Josh Roth, who I had on a couple of weeks ago, said is it's really more about your team is multi-threaded into their team. And that's exactly what you're doing. It's they're making connections with the people they'll be working with. And so it's not so much that you have 6 contacts in procurement. That's actually probably counterproductive. What it is you've got multiple people working together who are familiar with each other, and you're reducing that uncertainty. And you're also reducing the burden on the salesperson, to your point, try to be some superhero that frankly nobody can be and actually comes across as often quite inauthentic. All right.
100%. Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I think a lot of reps, just like they hear multi-threading from influencers or gurus or trainers, and they think, oh, that's another box for me to check. I should just make sure that I'm talking to 4 different people. It's like, that's not multi-threading, right? That's just adding 4 new contacts to your CRM and associating them to that company or that opportunity. Multi-threading is a much deeper concept that, yeah, you're right, involves multiple real relationships that add value to all parties. And to your point, the execution of that is critical. Like executing multi-threading is, again, not a checkbox, but can I get my CEO threaded in? Can I get my CRO threaded in? Can I get some of the service providers on Refine Labs who are brilliant VPs of marketing? Can I get them threaded into the marketing team, right? That is good multi-threading, not me sending just a note to everyone at the organization. That's not multi-threading, right? So anyways, good point.
All right, I'm going to get you out of here on two more questions. One, do you have any deal that's like just funny or memorable or anything that just kind of sticks out if you think back, or you just kind of gives you a chance to laugh at yourself a little bit?
I have one deal that is like I laugh now, I cried then, but it was just painful deal, man. At HubSpot, I was working with a very aggressive buyer who is very domineering, and I remember every time I would try to like set next steps or like do any of and I'm not saying I was perfect or anything, right? I was probably a little bit salesy, but she called me that. I remember we were at the end of the process, just beating me up over a discount, et cetera. And finally we found a compromise, which meant I just gave her the discount she wanted because I had to be done with this and move on with my life. Like I was getting depressed. And I had asked her, like, so I was going to send her over contract and paperwork and stuff. And I was like, hey, like, it's Tuesday, I said something like, can I, sending you a contract here, like, are we good? Like, can I expect a signature by Friday? Right. I asked some kind of a question like that to frame up, like, I'm not, the worst thing is to send a quote out and you have like no idea when it's going to get signed. Right. So like basic sales 101 stuff. And this was a sales leader. So I thought like, that she would appreciate it. I'm sure this is what she would want her salespeople to do, right? And oh man, she lit me up, and she was just like, "This, that's just such a salesy question, and like your salesiness is just wearing on me." And she literally said that on a call, and I kind of like laughed it off, and it's like, haha, yeah, sorry, just want to make sure I can forecast back to my sales manager. It was so belittling to me that I just like that moment stuck with me, right? I hate being called salesy because like I really try hard to like be the anti-salesperson. So I laugh about that now, and I realize that like I wish that I would have just stuck to a 0% discount and just been like, take a hike if you don't want it, and just detach from the outcome. And I think like that's the big learning right now. It's like I'm pretty detached from the outcome. It's like, hey, here's what we can do. This is what it costs. Like this is why I think it's the right move. But if you don't want to do it, go do something else. I don't care. It's fine. And so that's what it taught me in a rambling way. So I laugh about it now, but it really affected me negatively then, man. It was really it was an insult. I took it very personally, and I was like, "That sucks. That sucked. I never want to do that again." So I laugh now, cried then. So
I think that's awesome that you take it personally. I think that's great. That's what makes you where you, who you are today. So, inquiring minds want to know though: did she sign or did she not sign?
yeah, you signed. We won the
All
deal.
right, you closed the deal, but you felt bad about it. Isn't that amazing?
Right. That's right. It got me to quota. Salesy or not salesy, I won. I win.
Sometimes you just got to chalk those up. There's no picture
I
on the
know.
scoreboard, right?
No.
All right, so we'll get you out of here on this. This is the fun question. So I like to ask all my guests, like, what is kind of the one live or artistic, artsy event, music, comedy, theater, can even be a sporting event that you would recommend somebody experience, like something that you love.
You really stuck me with that question. The reason I say that is because, like, I'm the most boring human being alive. Like, I don't go to any of those things that you just said. Like, I'm the guy who needs those recommendations. Like, Carl, live your life a little bit. Go see a Taylor Swift concert or something like that, you know? So I don't have a good answer for you, but I'll share. If anyone's traveling, my favorite city. I'm Portuguese. I have family in Portugal, etc. And if anyone just wants to ever go stay somewhere, I'll give you a recommend. Can I just give like a totally like out of left field recommendation? Is that cool with you?
Oh, 100%.
So a city that no one's really ever heard of. It's west of Lisbon. Lisbon, the capital of Portugal. West means towards like the ocean. Is a city called Ericeira. It's spelled like my name Ferreira, except it's Eriera, right? With a C in there. I spelled that wrong. But it's this little surfer town, like west of Lisbon. It's amazing. Like you can go stay so cheap. The food is delicious. So there's my recommendation. If you want to go live life and maybe not go to a show or something like that, like go there. If you're ever in Portugal, I tell everybody to do that. And some of them eventually do. And they're like, oh my God, this was the best. So that's Carl's recommendation. If anyone's traveling, to Portugal or Spain, check it out. That's my favorite spot. One day, Jeff, I will buy an apartment out there and spend most of my year there. And I will wake up and I will surf every morning. And yeah, it's one of my dreams. So Sharon, that's the first time I shared that publicly. So
All right, you heard it here first, and Portugal is definitely on my bucket list. So I will take that one to heart.
I'll
So
go with you.
awesome, Carl. Well, thank you so much. How do you want folks to get in touch with you? What's the easiest way?
Yeah, man, LinkedIn. I mean, send me a message if anybody wants to chat about anything. I'm pretty responsive and stuff, and I'm always open to taking calls about whatever. So early career sellers, kind of taking their careers to the next level. Obviously, if anybody wants to talk like marketing or sales, then we can do that. Or Refine Labs, right? We can help you with your with pipeline, and revenue from a marketing source perspective. So yeah, just come ping me on LinkedIn.
Love it. All right. Well, thank you, Carl, and that was fantastic. Until next time, we have an awesome guest in 2 weeks. Ravi will be joining us,
Nice.
and so we'll be publishing that. But thank you, Carl. That was awesome.